The essay sat on Ms. Patterson's desk between us. 2 identical papers, same words, same title, but only one truth. My stepsister Vivian's hands trembled as she pointed at me, her voice cracking with rehearsed desperation. She copied me. I wrote it first, I swear. But Ms. Patterson's eyes weren't on Vivian. They were on me, searching, measuring, and in that weighted silence before judgment, I felt the ghost of my former life press against my chest, a reminder of every time I'd let this moment destroy me. I was 28 when I died, not dramatically, not tragically, just tired. My heart simply stopped one night in the small apartment I'd rented after my father's family finally succeeded in erasing me completely. They'd taken my inheritance, my mother's jewellery, even the patents I'd filed under my own name. Vivian had stood at my father's side during the final hearing, her hand on his arm, her expression the perfect mask of sorrowful concern, as the judge ruled that I had abandoned the family business and forfeited all claims. She'd worn my mother's pearl necklace to that hearing. I'd been too exhausted to cry. The last thing I remembered was staring at my laptop screen, reading an article about Vivian's promotion to creative director at the marketing firm where I'd once worked. They'd given her credit for the campaign I'd designed 3 years earlier, the one that had won national recognition. My name had been scrubbed from every record. In the accompanying photo, she smiled brilliantly, wearing a dress I'd seen in my own closet once. The comments praised her innovation, her vision, her self-made success. Then, nothing. Then, light. Then, my childhood bedroom, and I was 14 again, sitting at the same desk where I'd written my first real essay, the one about my mother's death and what grief teaches you about permanence, the one that would win the regional writing competition in 6 weeks, the one Vivian would steal. Not this time. My father had remarried when I was 12, 2 years after my mother's death from cancer. Vivian and her mother, Catherine, had moved into our house with practiced efficiency, reorganising rooms, replacing photographs, speaking over me at dinner as though I were furniture that came with the property. My father, drowning in his own grief, had simply let it happen. He'd stopped seeing me somewhere between the funeral and the wedding, and by the time Vivian arrived, I was already a ghost in my own home. In my previous life, I'd tried so hard to make them love me. I'd bent myself into shapes that fit their narrative. The troubled daughter who resented her new family, the jealous stepsister who couldn't accept her father's happiness. When Vivian wanted my room because it had better light, I'd moved. When she needed money for art supplies, I'd given her my birthday cash. When she'd cried to my father that I was cruel to her, I'd apologised for cruelties I'd never committed. And when she'd stolen my essay, literally taken it from my notebook while I slept, and submitted it as her own, I'd been too shocked to fight effectively. I'd stood in the principal's office, 14 and inarticulate with betrayal, while Vivian sobbed about how I was trying to sabotage her because I was jealous. My father had believed her. The teachers had believed her. The handwriting was hers after all. She'd copied it meticulously. And I had no proof beyond my word against her tears. I'd lost the competition, lost my father's trust, lost the scholarship the essay would have earned me. That was the first major theft, but it established the pattern that would define the next 14 years of my life. Every achievement I worked toward, Vivian learned to take. Every opportunity I created, she learned to occupy. Every relationship I built, she learned to poison. By the time I was 21, I'd stopped trying to build anything at all. But this life, this second chance that I still couldn't explain, had given me something more valuable than youth. It had given me memory. I knew exactly what would happen, when it would happen, and how to ensure it happened differently. The essay sat in my desk drawer now, completed 2 weeks earlier than I'd written it originally. But this time, I'd done something my 14-year-old self hadn't known to do. I'd documented everything. I'd photographed each page as I drafted it, dated and saved. I'd emailed myself the outline with timestamps. I'd casually mentioned specific themes and quotes to Ms. Patterson during office hours, establishing the ideas as a mine in her mind. I'd built an invisible fortress around my work. And then I'd left it exactly where Vivian would find it. I'd watched her over those 2 weeks, this girl who was my age now but whom I knew so completely. It felt like holding a manual to a simple machine. She'd struggled with her own essay assignment, crumpling paper after paper, her frustration mounting. Catherine had pressured her constantly. Vivian needed to excel, needed to stand out, needed to prove she belonged in this wealthy school district where my father's money had bought our address. The pressure made her reckless. I'd seen the moment she made the decision. Her eyes had flickered to my notebook, then away, then back. I'd pretended to sleep, my breathing even, while she'd carefully photographed each page with her phone. The next morning, my essay was gone from my notebook. She'd torn the pages out, not realizing I'd expected exactly that. I'd reported nothing, said nothing. I'd simply rewritten the essay from memory during study hall, my handwriting calm and familiar, while Vivian spent her evenings copying my stolen pages in her own script. She'd practiced the plagiarism like an art form, making my words look like her truth. When we both turned in identical essays, Ms. Patterson's face had shown no surprise, only a deep, careful attention. She'd asked us both to stay after class, and now here we stood, Vivian's performance of innocent victimhood already in full swing. Eleanor has always resented me, Vivian was saying, her voice trembling with precisely calibrated hurt. Ever since my mum and I moved in, she's never wanted us there. She's always trying to make me look bad in front of our dad. This is cruel. I worked so hard on this essay. It's about my own feelings and my own experience. And she just copied it to hurt me. She was good. I'd forgotten how good she was at this. The slight catch in her voice, the way her eyes filled with tears but didn't spill over, the protective way she clutched the essay to her chest as though it were a wounded child. Any adult watching would want to comfort her, would want to punish whoever had caused such genuine pain. But Ms. Patterson wasn't watching Vivian. She was still watching me. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "do you have anything to say?" In my previous life, I'd exploded at this moment. I'd shouted, gesticulated wildly, called Vivian a liar and a thief. I'd made myself look exactly like the jealous, unstable stepsister Vivian had painted me as. My passion had condemned me. "I wrote the essay," I said, calmly, meeting Miss Patterson's eyes. "Every word. I can prove it if necessary, but I don't think I'll need to." Vivian's sob was immediate. "See? She's so cold about it. She doesn't even care that she's lying. Miss Patterson, please." "The essay is about your mother's death," Miss Patterson said, still looking at me. "About watching her deteriorate from cancer. About the specific way grief changes your understanding of time and memory." "Yes," I said. "Vivian," Miss Patterson turned to my stepsister. "Your mother is alive and well. I met her at parent-teacher night last month." The room went very quiet. I watched Vivian's face cycle through expressions, confusion, panic, recalculation. "It's fictionalized," she said quickly. "Creative license. The assignment said we could write personal essays or creative non-fiction, and I chose to imagine what it would be like if the assignment was explicitly personal narrative," Ms. Patterson said. Her voice remained gentle, but something steel-hard had entered it. "Based on real experience. And more than that, Vivian, I've read your writing all semester. I know your voice, your vocabulary, your sentence structure, your way of building arguments. This essay sounds nothing like you." She turned back to me. "But it sounds exactly like Eleanor." I watched Vivian's careful performance crack. Her hands clenched on the paper, crumpling it. "That's not fair. You're biased. You've always liked her better because she's quiet and weird, and teachers always fall for that. I'd like you to rewrite the essay," Ms. Patterson said calmly. "In my office, right now, on the same topic. You'll have 1 hour. Eleanor, you'll do the same in the classroom next door. Then we'll compare the results to these submissions." Vivian's face went white. "I don't have to prove anything to you. My mum will hear about this. You're prejudiced against me because of Eleanor's manipulations. Or," Miss Patterson continued as though Vivian hadn't spoken, "you can tell me the truth right now, and we can discuss appropriate consequences for academic dishonesty." I waited. In my previous life, this moment hadn't existed. Miss Patterson had believed Vivian's tears, or at least had found it easier to remain neutral, to call it a misunderstanding that couldn't be proven either way. But I'd changed the equation this time. I'd planted doubt weeks in advance. I'd established my voice in Ms. Patterson's mind so thoroughly that Vivian's theft had been obvious the moment she'd seen both papers. Vivian looked at me then, really looked at me, and something flickered in her eyes that I recognised: fear. She'd always known, on some level, that I could fight back. She'd simply counted on me being too broken, too tired, too well-trained in defeat to ever do so. "Fine," she whispered. I found her notebook and I thought, I was having trouble with the assignment and it was right there, and I thought I could just use the structure, the ideas. But then She was trying to minimize it, to make it sound like a momentary weakness rather than calculated theft. Ms. Patterson raised one hand, stopping her. "You plagiarized Eleanor's entire essay," she said flatly. "Word for word. You didn't accidentally borrow ideas. You stole her work and presented it as your own." She looked at me. "Eleanor, I apologize that you've been put in this position. Your essay is extraordinary, and I want you to know that I recognized your voice immediately. I've watched you develop as a writer all semester, and this piece is a natural evolution of everything you've been working on." Something in my chest loosened. Not triumph. I'd known I would win this time. But vindication, perhaps, or just the simple relief of being believed. "I'll need to report this to the principal," Miss Patterson continued, speaking to Vivian now. "Plagiarism is grounds for failure in the course and possible suspension. Your parents will be contacted." Vivian's tears were real now, messy and desperate. "Please don't tell my mum, please. You don't understand what she's like when I disappoint her. Please, I'll do anything. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because I did understand what Catherine was like. I'd lived with her cruelty for years. The constant pressure and impossible standards. The way she'd shaped Vivian into a weapon aimed at taking everything I had. But sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when I knew exactly where this pattern would lead, if I didn't break it now. "Come with me," Miss Patterson said to Vivian, her voice softening slightly. "We'll call your mother together. Eleanor, you're free to go. I'll enter your essay into the regional competition as planned." I gathered my things slowly, aware of Vivian's eyes on me, red and hateful now that the performance had crumbled. As I reached the door, she spoke. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You think you've won something, but you don't know what you've started." I looked back at her, this girl who had stolen 14 years of my life, and smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "I do." My father didn't believe me at first, of course. When the principal called that evening, I could hear him making excuses from where I sat in the kitchen, my homework spread before me. Catherine had encouraged Vivian. Catherine had put too much pressure on the girls. They'd misunderstood the assignment parameters. Vivian had meant to cite her sources properly, but had gotten confused about the process. He'd hung up and immediately rounded on me. "What did you do to provoke this? Vivian says you've been hostile to her for weeks. She says you left your notebook out deliberately to tempt her." "I left my notebook in my own room," I said calmly. "In my desk. She went through my things and stole my work." "She made a mistake. She's 14 years old, Eleanor. You're supposed to be the bigger person. I am 14 years old," I said. the same age as Vivian. Why am I expected to be the bigger person when she's expected to be forgiven? He'd stared at me as though I'd spoken in a foreign language. In my previous life, I'd cried during this conversation. I'd begged him to believe me, to choose me, to see what Vivian and Catherine were doing. My desperation had only made him more certain that I was the problem, the unstable daughter who couldn't accept her new family. This time, I was composed. I stated facts. I offered evidence, the timestamps on my emails to myself, the photographs of my drafts, the notes from my conversation with Ms. Patterson, weeks before Vivian had stolen the essay. I presented it all like a legal case, unemotional and thorough. It rattled him. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the way he looked at me as though I'd become someone he didn't recognise. Good. The person he'd known had been easy to dismiss. This version of me would be harder to ignore. Catherine arrived home 20 minutes later, Vivian in tow. The girl's face was blotchy from crying, her expression that of a wounded animal. Catherine swept into the house like a storm system, immediately taking Vivian into her arms. "What have you done to my daughter?" she demanded, glaring at me over Vivian's shoulder. "How dare you try to sabotage her like this? I know exactly what you're doing. You can't stand that she's more talented than you, that teachers like her better, that your father loves her as much as he loves you. So you set up this elaborate scheme to make her look like a cheater." "Eleanor's essay was written 3 weeks ago," my father said quietly. He held up the printed emails I'd shown him, the ones I'd sent to myself with full drafts attached. "I just checked the timestamps. These are legitimate, and her teacher says she recognised Eleanor's writing style immediately." Catherine's face went very still. Then she pivoted smoothly, her expression rearranging itself into something softer, more vulnerable. "Roger, you can't seriously believe these timestamps could be faked. Anyone can change a computer's clock. And of course, the teacher took Eleanor's side. You know how she manipulates adults, how she plays the tragic orphan to get sympathy." "My mother died," I said quietly. "That's not manipulation. That's my life." "Which you've weaponized, or..." Catherine shot back. "You use your grief to make everyone feel sorry for you while you systematically undermine my daughter. You've resented us since the day we moved in. Admit it." In my previous life, she'd won this argument. She'd made my grief sound like a character flaw, my mourning like an attack on her family. My father, unable to face his own guilt over remarrying so quickly, over forgetting my mother so thoroughly, had chosen to believe Catherine's version of reality. "I don't resent you," I said calmly. "I resent the theft. If Vivian had written her own essay, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "She did write her own essay," Catherine insisted. "Eleanor is lying about the timeline, manipulating her evidence." "The teacher confirmed Eleanor's story," my father interrupted. He sounded tired, older than his 45 years. "She says Eleanor discussed the specific themes and quotes with her weeks ago during office hours. There are witnesses. Eleanor isn't lying." The silence that followed was profound. I watched Catherine recalculate in real time, saw her decide that she couldn't win this battle, that she'd need to cede this ground in order to win the war. She softened, pulled Vivian closer. "Then I'm disappointed in Vivian," she said, her voice heavy with maternal sorrow. "She'll accept her punishment, of course. She'll learn from this. But I hope, Roger, that we can handle this as a family, that we don't need to make this bigger than it is. She's a child who made a mistake. She doesn't deserve to have her entire future ruined over one essay." I saw the path she was trying to create, minimise the theft, emphasise Vivian's youth and supposed remorse, position me as vindictive if I pushed for full consequences, make my father choose between mercy for Vivian and justice for me, knowing that mercy would feel like the noble choice. "The consequences are already determined," I said before my father could respond, Ms. Patterson reported the plagiarism to the principal. Vivian will fail the assignment and serve academic suspension. That's school policy, not my choice. Catherine's eyes flashed with real hatred then, quickly masked. How generous of you to wash your hands of it. You've destroyed Vivian's academic record, but you want to pretend you're not responsible. Vivian destroyed her own academic record, I said, by stealing my work. I didn't make her do that. I didn't force her hand. She chose to go through my private belongings, photograph my essay, and submit it as her own. Those were her choices, not mine. Vivian had been silent through all of this, her face pressed against Catherine's shoulder. Now she looked up, and her eyes met mine with an expression of such pure loathing that even my father noticed it. She didn't look remorseful. She looked like someone planning revenge. Good, let her plan. I'd already lived through everything she could possibly do to me. This time, I'd be ready for all of it. The regional writing competition was 3 weeks later. I attended alone. My father offered to come, but Catherine had convinced him that showing up would be rubbing salt in Vivian's wound, since she couldn't compete after her suspension. I hadn't argued. I no longer needed his presence to validate my achievements. My essay won first place. The judges said it showed a maturity and emotional depth, far beyond my years. They praised its honest exploration of grief and resilience, its specific details that made abstract concepts viscerally real. One judge told me she'd cried reading it. Another said it was the best piece she'd seen from a high school student in 2 decades. I accepted the award with quiet gratitude, took photographs with the other winners, collected my scholarship certificate. The whole time, I could feel the ghost of my previous life watching, that version of me who'd lost this moment, who'd spent the rest of her life wondering what might have been different if people had just believed her about one essay. Everything would have been different. This was the divergence point, the moment that would have given me confidence, opportunities, proof that my voice mattered. Vivian had understood that instinctively, had known exactly what she was taking when she'd stolen those pages. But this time, she'd failed. And I'd established something more important than a writing prize. I'd established that I could defend myself, that I documented evidence, that I wouldn't cry or beg or make myself small to keep the peace. Every future attempt to steal from me, to undermine me, to erase me would be measured against this moment. Vivian and Catherine both knew now that I wouldn't be an easy victim. School became different after that. Other students had heard about the plagiarism incident, not to the details, just rumours that Vivian had been suspended for cheating. Her social position, always carefully maintained, began to crack. People were wary of collaborating with her on projects. Teachers watched her more carefully. She felt the weight of scrutiny, of lost trust, and I could see it eating at her. She tried several times to retaliate in small ways, spreading rumours about me, accidentally ruining my art project, befriending a boy I'd casually mentioned at liking just to make a show of rejecting him. But I didn't react the way I had in my previous life. I didn't cry or confront or spiral. I simply documented each incident, reported what needed reporting, and moved on. Each time she failed to provoke me, she became more frustrated, more reckless. Catherine was more subtle, more dangerous. She began undermining me to my father in quiet, consistent ways, expressing concern about my cold demeanour, my obsessive need to document things, my lack of sisterly forgiveness toward Vivian. She suggested therapy, but framed it as though I were disturbed rather than hurt. She shifted household rules to disadvantage me, took away privileges while expanding Vivian's, orchestrated situations where I'd look selfish for asserting boundaries. But I'd lived through her playbook once before. I knew every move she'd make, every manipulation she'd attempt, and I had something she didn't expect. Patience. I didn't need to win every battle. I just needed to survive until I was 18, until I could access my trust fund from my mother's estate, the one Catherine didn't know about yet, the one she'd tried to steal in my previous timeline, the one I was already quietly protecting with lawyers my father knew nothing about. 4 years. I could endure 4 years of Catherine's machinations and Vivian's resentment, because I knew how the story ended if I played my hand correctly. In my previous life, I'd lost everything because I'd fought too obviously, too emotionally, giving them ammunition to paint me as unstable. This time, I'd be the calm one, the responsible one, the one who couldn't be dismissed as dramatic or vindictive. This time, I'd let them destroy themselves. The months passed in a careful dance. Vivian failed out of AP English and had to drop to regular classes. Her own writing was revealed to be mediocre once she couldn't steal mine. Her grades slipped across multiple subjects, and the pressure from Catherine intensified. I watched her buckle under expectations she'd never be able to meet honestly, knowing that every failure would make her more desperate, more likely to make mistakes. I, meanwhile, excelled. Not dramatically. I was careful not to outshine Vivian so obviously that Catherine could frame it as hostile competition. But I built relationships with teachers, counsellors, mentors. I volunteered for activities that would look good on college applications. I wrote more essays, entered more competitions, won more awards. Each one was documented, protected, undeniably mine. By the end of freshman year, the household dynamics had shifted significantly. My father had begun noticing inconsistencies in Catherine's stories about me, had caught her in several small lies. He didn't confront her, he was too conflict-averse for that. But I could see him pulling back, becoming more observant. Doubt, once planted, grew stubbornly. Vivian, meanwhile, had become a different kind of problem for Catherine. Her academic struggles, her disciplinary issues, her inability to maintain the image of a perfect daughter, all of it reflected poorly on Catherine's parenting. And Catherine, who had married my father for his money and status, couldn't afford to look like a failure. The pressure she put on Vivian became almost cruel, and I almost felt sorry for the girl. Almost. But then I'd remember the 14 years of my previous life that she'd helped destroy, and my sympathy would evaporate like morning dew. The second year of my rebirth brought new challenges. Vivian, increasingly isolated at school and desperate to regain her mother's approval, attempted something more ambitious. She tried to steal my science fair project. I'd been working on it for months, a study of water contamination in local streams, complete with data collection, analysis, and recommendations for community action. It was good work, the kind that might attract attention from universities later. But I'd learned my lesson about leaving things vulnerable. My project materials were password protected on my computer, backed up to multiple secure locations. My physical notes were kept in a locked box in my locker at school, and I'd been documenting my progress with my science teacher, Mr. Harrison, sending him weekly updates that proved the work was mine. When Vivian tried to access my computer, she triggered the security system I'd installed, a simple program that logged all access attempts and took photographs using the webcam. I had clear images of her trying to guess my password, time-stamped and undeniable. I didn't confront her. I simply showed the evidence to my father. His face, when he saw those photographs, was something I'd never seen in my previous life. Genuine disappointment in Vivian. Not anger, not defensiveness, just tired, deep disappointment. She's struggling, Catherine tried to explain. She's under so much pressure to live up to Eleanor's achievements. This isn't malice, Roger, it's desperation. She needs help, not punishment. She needs to stop stealing from my daughter, my father said quietly. And the possessive pronoun, my daughter, not our daughter, hung in the air like a verdict. That was the moment I knew I'd won the long game. Not because Vivian had been caught again, but because my father had finally started to see the pattern. 1 theft could be a mistake. 2 was a behaviour. And Catherine's constant excuses and manipulations, which had seemed reasonable when he'd wanted to believe them, now looked like what they were: enabling. Vivian's science fair project that year was hastily thrown together and mediocre. Mine won regionals and placed 3rd at the state competition. The scholarship that came with it, $5,000 toward college, was deposited directly into an account only I could access. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of my mother's trust fund, but symbolically, it mattered. I'd earned something they couldn't touch, couldn't steal, couldn't diminish. The summer after sophomore year, Catherine made her biggest mistake. She tried to access my mother's trust fund. In my previous life, she'd succeeded through a complicated scheme involving forged documents and my father's signature on papers he hadn't read carefully. She drained nearly $200,000 before I'd noticed, and by then, legal recovery had been nearly impossible. The money had been invested in ventures that had mysteriously failed, leaving no trail and no accountability. This time, I'd already hired my own lawyer using money from my mother's estate that Catherine didn't know about. I'd established myself as a communicative, competent beneficiary. I'd set up alerts for any access attempts, and when Catherine tried to execute her forgery scheme, my lawyer caught it immediately. The confrontation happened in our living room on a Tuesday evening. My lawyer was present, as was my father's attorney, whom I'd insisted be called. Catherine had tried to charm her way out of it at first, claiming misunderstanding, but the evidence was damning. Forged signatures, falsified documents, attempted wire transfers. "You've been planning to steal from Eleanor for years," my father said. His voice was hollow, like something had broken in him. "That's why you wanted me to remarry so quickly after her mother died. That's why you were so interested in the estate details. You married me for Eleanor's inheritance. That's not... Roger, you can't believe..." "I have recordings," I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. "Conversations between you and Vivian. Discussions about my mother's estate, about how to access the trust fund, about which assets would be easiest to liquidate. I've been documenting for 2 years." The colour drained from Catherine's face. Vivian, sitting beside her mother on the couch, looked between us in growing panic. "You recorded us?" Catherine whispered. "That's illegal. You can't..." "Pakistan has one-party consent laws for recording," my lawyer said calmly. "If Eleanor was present during these conversations, the recordings are legal and admissible." I hadn't been present for most of them. But Catherine didn't know that, couldn't be sure, and I watched her trying to calculate what I might have heard, what I might have captured. The paranoia was almost satisfying. "I want a divorce," my father said into the silence. "And I want you out of my house. Both of you." Vivian's sob was immediate. "Dad, please, I didn't know what Mum was doing. I didn't know it was this serious. Please don't make me leave. This is my home too." "You stole from Eleanor twice," my father said. His voice was gentle but immovable. "You've bullied her, undermined her, made her feel unwelcome in her own home. I should have stopped it years ago. I should have protected her. I'm protecting her now." "You're choosing her over me." Vivian's voice rose to a wail. "Over your own..." "Eleanor is my daughter," my father said. "My only daughter. You are Catherine's daughter, and I'm sorry that your mother's choices have put you in this position. But I can't keep enabling what's been happening in this house." The divorce took 6 months to finalise. Catherine fought it viciously, trying to claim abandonment, emotional distress, entitlement to half of assets she'd already tried to steal. But my father's lawyers were better than hers, and the evidence of her attempted fraud made her position untenable. She ended up with a minimal settlement and no access to my trust fund. Vivian transferred to a different school district, back to the neighbourhood where she and Catherine had lived before. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd struggled there too. Academically, socially, emotionally, without her mother's schemes to prop her up, without my achievements to steal, she'd been exposed as painfully average. Last I'd heard, she'd dropped out of AP classes entirely and was barely maintaining a C average. I felt no triumph in her struggles, just a distant, detached observation of natural consequences. My father and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. It was awkward at first. We'd been strangers for so long, and the betrayals on both sides needed acknowledgement. He apologized eventually for not believing me, for choosing his comfort over my welfare, for letting grief and loneliness make him vulnerable to Catherine's manipulations. I forgave him because I understood now what I hadn't in my previous life. He'd been a drowning man who'd grabbed the first hand offered, not realizing it was pulling him down. Catherine had been skilled at targeting weakness, at making dependence feel like love. By senior year, I'd accumulated an impressive academic record. Perfect grades, multiple writing awards, science fair recognitions, volunteer work, leadership positions. I applied to my mother's alma mater, a prestigious liberal arts college on the East Coast, and was accepted with a full scholarship. The trust fund would remain for graduate school, or whatever future I chose to build. The night before I left for college, my father helped me pack the last boxes into my car. We stood in the driveway together, the summer evening warm and golden, and he pulled me into a hug. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Your mother would be proud of you. The way you stood up for yourself, the way you refused to be erased. That took courage I don't think I ever had." "You stood up eventually," I said. "That's what matters. I should have stood up sooner. I should have seen what was happening." "Maybe," I agreed. "But you see it now. We can't change the past." He pulled back, studying my face with an expression of bewildered affection. "When did you get so wise? Sometimes I look at you and you seem so much older than 18, like you've lived more than one lifetime." I smiled at him, thinking of the woman I'd been at 28, exhausted and erased and used up. "Maybe I'm just a good observer," I said. "I pay attention to patterns." At college, I thrived. I'd worried that without the adversarial dynamic with Vivian and Catherine, without the constant need to protect and defend myself, I might lose direction. But instead, I felt liberated. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I could work on things simply because I wanted to, not because I needed to prove ownership or establish priority. I joined the literary magazine, published essays and short stories. I studied psychology and creative writing, fascinated by the intersection of narrative and trauma, of storytelling and healing. I made friends, real friends, not people I had to keep at arm's length to protect myself. I even dated, though cautiously, always aware of how vulnerability could be weaponized. Sometimes I thought about Vivian, wondered what had become of her. I'd blocked her on social media, avoided mutual acquaintances who might share updates. I didn't need to know. Her story was no longer connected to mine in any meaningful way. But occasionally, usually late at night when I was writing, I'd remember that moment in Ms. Patterson's office, the essay on the desk between us, Vivian's trembling voice insisting she'd written it, Ms. Patterson's calm certainty that she knew my voice. That had been the turning point, the moment when I'd learned that the best defense against people who wanted to steal your identity was to establish it so clearly, so thoroughly, that theft became immediately obvious. "I know your voice," Ms. Patterson had said. Such a simple statement, but it contained everything I'd spent my previous life desperate to hear. "I see you, I recognize you. You exist independently of anyone else's story about you." In my senior year of college, I published my first book, a memoir about grief, family betrayal, and finding your voice in the aftermath of loss. I didn't mention Vivian by name, but I didn't have to. The themes were clear. Plagiarism as erasure, theft as a form of violence, the long process of reclaiming what had been taken. The book did well. Not spectacularly, it wasn't a bestseller or anything dramatic, but it found its audience, people who'd experienced similar erasures and who recognised their own stories in mine. I got letters from readers thanking me for putting words to their experiences. Several professors assigned it in their course on creative nonfiction and trauma literature. My father read it and cried. He called me afterward. his voice thick with emotion, and apologized again for not seeing, not understanding, not protecting me when I'd needed it most. "You were just a child," he said, 14 years old, and you had to fight so hard just to be believed about one essay. I should have believed you immediately. I should have protected your work, your voice, your identity. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I'm so sorry." "I know," I said gently. "I forgave you a long time ago, Dad. The book wasn't about making you feel guilty. It was about telling the truth of what happened. That's all." "Still," he said, "I want you to know that I see it now. I see what they tried to do to you, and I see how you refused to let them succeed. You're stronger than both of us, stronger than me, stronger than your mother ever got the chance to be. I just wish I'd been strong enough to stand beside you from the beginning." "You're standing beside me now," I said. "That's what I needed to hear." After graduation, I was offered a position teaching creative writing at a small college in New England. It felt right, spending my days helping students find their voices, teaching them how to protect their work, showing them that their words mattered. I thought often about Miss Patterson during those early teaching years, about how one teacher's willingness to truly listen, to recognize a student's authentic voice, had changed the entire trajectory of my life. I made it a point to learn my students' writing styles early, to pay attention to their individual voices. When plagiarism cases arose, and they did occasionally, I handled them with care, but also with certainty. I understood now that sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was refuse to accept their lies, to hold them accountable before the pattern became their identity. 5 years after my book was published, I received an unexpected email. The return address was unfamiliar, but when I opened it, I recognized the writing style immediately. Vivian. The email was long, meandering, full of justifications and explanations. She was in therapy now, she wrote. She was working on accountability. She understood that what she'd done to me had been wrong, not just the plagiarism, but all of it, the years of undermining and theft and casual cruelty. Her therapist had suggested she write to me, not to ask for forgiveness necessarily, but to acknowledge the harm she'd caused. She didn't ask to meet, didn't ask for reconciliation, just wanted me to know that she understood now, that she was trying to become someone different, someone better. She said she'd read my book, that it had been painful but necessary, that she was sorry. I read the email 3 times, then saved it in a folder and closed my laptop. I didn't respond. Maybe that made me cruel, but I'd learned that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I could release my anger. I had released it years ago without inviting her back into my life. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. But I did hope, in a distant sort of way, that she found whatever healing she was looking for. Not for her sake, but because healing broken people meant fewer victims in the world. If therapy and accountability could transform her into someone who didn't need to steal other people's achievements to feel whole, then everyone benefited. That evening, I sat at my desk in my small faculty apartment and opened a new document. I'd been thinking about writing a novel, something fictional but rooted in the themes I knew best: identity, voice, the mathematics of power in families, the kind of story where the protagonist didn't need supernatural rebirth to reclaim herself, just clarity and courage and the willingness to document evidence. As I wrote the opening lines, I thought about that 14-year-old girl standing in Miss Patterson's office, calm and certain despite everything trying to convince her she was wrong. I thought about how much courage it had taken to simply state the truth. I wrote this. This is mine. I can prove it. And I thought about how that moment of being believed, of having someone recognize my voice, had been the foundation for everything that came after. Not because the award mattered, though it had, not because the scholarship mattered, though it had, but because someone had looked at my work and said, "This is yours. I know it. I recognize you." In the end, that was what Vivian had tried to steal. Not just words on a page, but the fundamental right to be recognised, to exist, to have a voice that was unmistakably, undeniably mine. She'd failed, and in failing, she'd taught me the most important lesson. The surest way to protect your identity is to establish it so clearly, so thoroughly, so authentically, that no one else can wear it convincingly. I didn't destroy them. I simply refused to be erased. And that, I'd learned, was the most powerful form of victory. Not revenge, but persistence. Not destruction, but the quiet, unshakable certainty of knowing exactly who you are,